Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar of the End User Subsidy Lab. We will be starting in 2 minutes, but thank you all for joining early and on time. I see quite a number of people still coming in, so we will start in 2 minutes, but welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon. All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar of the End User Subsidy Lab. We are quite excited to have this conversation with all of you. The End User Subsidy Lab and our partners who are the World Bank ESMA program, NDEV, the Clean Cooking Alliance, and we've really been appreciative for the support that we've had from Humanitarian and the Global Platform for Action, even as we prepared for this webinar. I'm quite excited for the conversation and the findings that we'll be presenting to you this afternoon. And we'll go straight into it because we have a lot to share with you. So welcome. As we start, please note that we have a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you've got any questions as we go along, please do type them in there and we will be glad to answer them, or all the panelists can respond to that. You can also use the chat function and we'll be able to keep the dialogue and the conversation between us and you going. Just for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, the End User Subsidy Lab was a platform that was put together about 2.5 years ago with the support of ESMAP and NDEV, because there was a recognition that to reach everybody and to provide universal energy access, there was going to be a need of various types of public funding from governments as well as development partners in the form of end user subsidies that would really not only grow the market, but primarily reduce the cost for end users or communities, households, businesses that we are trying to reach. The End User Subsidy Lab was designed as a platform that really looks at what the learnings have been for all the programs that have been piloted, tested, scaled across many markets for different technologies, for different use cases, see what has worked, what has not worked, especially as we look at the last effort to reach everybody and to pilot whatever has been proven to be most successful in delivering sustainable access, sustainable markets, and really sustainable results for all involved. So this is what we have been focusing on. For this one, if you go to the next slide, we're really looking at the issue around providing energy access to those who are living in displaced communities or in situations of displacement. And for this, we're really excited again to have the support of the UNITA and the Global Platform for Action. As we start this conversation around this, and before I hand over to our speakers today, we want to really remind everybody about the numbers of those that are yet to be reached in terms of end user energy access. Today, we talk about the over 600 million people without energy access in terms of electricity, about 666 million, and 1.2 million living without access to clean cooking. And we need to think about how we'll be able to reach all those people, and especially when it's driven by various factors. And when we look at people living within areas of displacement, it's really important to look at some of the elements that drive that displacement. We know some of that will be due to conflict, insecurity, and other factors that go on in our communities and in around us. But also we recognize the role that climate change, whether it's things like cyclones and tornadoes and hurricanes that come and wipe away communities or bring flooding, or we see communities that may be due to famine or due to drought that people are displaced. And this displacement can be for a short term or for a longer term. And within this context, we still have to be thinking about how do we provide energy access, but also what that energy access does to power lives and livelihoods in terms of economic and social activity, be it education, provision of healthcare, and other things that we need to be able to provide in that context. And it's with this, in this regard, that today the work that GAP and UNITA GP and UNITA have been looking at is particularly relevant. We want to recognize also the work that some of the partners that we've been working with have done in this regard, like Mercyco, in some of the countries out there, SE for All, and a lot of the other programs that we work on in delivering that. So we've got this paper that GAP has been working on that will be looking at the research findings and the key lessons, and see what lessons there are, but also looking at what's happened in real world situation contexts from our speakers. So with that, I'm really glad to invite Katie Patterson with the GPA Coordination Unit to set the stage for us in the context, and then we'll invite the rest of our speakers to present what they've seen in their countries. But thank you, and please let's go ahead. Katie?
Thank you, Patrick. So yes, I will kick us off just with a quick framing presentation to sort of, I think, try and bridge a couple divides, because I imagine our audience is a mix of people coming from the humanitarian sector, the development sector, and hopefully also the private sector. I think if we can go to the next slide, I'm not sure if I have control, and I think next slide after that too. So oh wait, do I have, no, I don't think I have control. There we go. So to kick off, I just want to clarify a little bit more who we are talking about when we talk about displaced people without energy access. So this is really around 40 million people who lack access to electricity and 50 million who lack access to clean cooking. And most of this group of displaced people are living in are living in low and middle income countries, which themselves have significant energy access gaps, largely in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. And they're often hosted in settings that are already considered hard to reach. And it's difficult to extend to markets there for that reason. But then there are also additional challenges related to their specific status of displacement that makes that makes things particularly challenging when it comes to delivering long-term sustainable energy access. And the gap is especially severe, it's worth noting, among displaced people living in camps and especially refugees. It's estimated that around 90% lack access to access to electricity, and over 80% lack access to clean cooking. And historically, in these contexts, energy access and energy provision, where it exists, has been the responsibility of the humanitarian agencies and organizations which serve these communities. But for a variety of structural factors, the humanitarian sector, which is very well set up to address short-term emergencies, has, I think, struggled and does not necessarily have the right structures to facilitate long-term reliable energy access transitions to renewable energy solutions for humanitarian operations, and then expanding that access to communities. And especially in the last year, drastic funding cuts in the humanitarian sector have been sort of forcing a rethink and a need for new approaches and figuring out how to serve the growing number of people globally who are displaced, who will be displaced in the coming years, as Patrick so rightly said, due to worsening climate change, the growing number of people who are affected by fragility, conflict, and disaster, and figure out how to do that with fewer resources, especially in the humanitarian sector. And of course, the way I think to do this really is to focus on shifting towards greater and earlier integration of displaced people into host countries and communities. So integrating them into the national economy, into basic service provision, ensuring displaced people are included in national and local energy and development planning, and enabling the local private sector to provide energy products and services to these communities, because the private sector is most well equipped to do this. And that kind of takes us to the meat of our work today and the research that we've undertaken over the last several months with the End User Subsidy Lab, of diving into subsidy programs that have been developed with the aim of promoting market development in displacement contexts. And so I will provide a little bit of high-level framing of what we've learned from that research process, and then I'll hand it over to our case study presenters to give you some more concrete examples of what effective subsidy design in displacement context looks like and the challenges associated with that. So in our research collaboration, we've mostly focused on how subsidies can be used to accelerate market development in protracted displacement settings, meaning contexts where people have been living in displacement, whether camps or communities, for many years, sometimes decades, and usually without much likelihood of returning home due to ongoing conflict or instability. Energy needs in these contexts are, to some extent, pretty straightforward. You have households, community services and institutions, businesses in need of access to electricity and clean cooking. And the main barriers to energy access in these spaces are largely similar to what they are in other hard to reach contexts. And then subsidies have a role to play in closing affordability gaps for end users, in reducing high cost per sale and operational costs for companies going into these more complex contexts, providing upfront working capital to the smaller companies that are often most interested in or already operating in these contexts, and then de-risking displacement and hard to reach settings for new companies to enter those markets. Next slide, please. While the factors that make it challenging to develop markets in general hard to reach settings and fragile and conflict affected and vulnerable settings are relevant in these displacement contexts, there are also, as I kind of mentioned at the top, several factors which are specifically tied to displacement that pose additional challenges and require consideration when you're designing subsidy programs to foster market development in these contexts. So firstly, the policy environment of a country is important, how the country is approaching internally displaced people and especially refugee inclusion, whether people have freedom of movement, the right to work, shapes their economic opportunities and income levels where they are located in a country. And it shapes the feasibility of this approach I mentioned of integrating displaced people into national and local systems. Also, kind of as I highlighted before, oftentimes displacement contexts are served by kind of parallel service systems run by humanitarian organizations and actors, and government humanitarian affairs counterparts, so sometimes different or in addition to other government and community partners you would work on energy access with. Displaced people are, of course, more mobile potentially than citizens. While a lot of the time people are living in displacement for several years, even decades, there is always the chance that displaced people can move home or move locations. Depending on the context, there may also be language and cultural differences that need to be taken into consideration when approaching displaced people as prospective customers. And then, of course, anytime you're working on engaging in promoting development or working on energy access in displaced communities or targeting displaced communities, it's important to take into consideration host community relationship as well, and the need to promote equity and quality of access between both groups. Next slide. While we have mostly focused on protracted displacement settings, it's also worth mentioning one of the interesting things that has come out of our research, and we'll also see an example in our presentation today from the FAZER program in Mozambique, is that subsidies can also play an important role in crisis response and in addressing those drivers of displacement, disaster, and conflict that Patrick mentioned, and in addressing in fragile settings where conflict or disaster are sort of endemic or ongoing and an expected recurring challenge for market development, subsidies also have a role to play. So obviously energy is highly needed in crisis contexts, and energy markets are needed, but crisis, of course, has the tendency to create disruptions in the market. And so sources of working capital can dry up as financiers work out or pull out. Economic uncertainty and disruption can depress demand and impact customers' ability to make payments where otherwise they might have previously been able to make them without problem. Reaching certain communities can become even more challenging and expensive for companies if infrastructure is damaged, if there are new or worsening security risks. And so in emergency settings and settings of endemic fragility where we know conflict and disaster are likely to reoccur, subsidies also can have an important role to play in preserving the market in response to shocks, in enabling the market to support the emergency response, and then paving the way for a more public-private partnership approach to early recovery and resilience building. Next slide, please. So I'll try to run through these last two slides quickly. I've given you sort of the overview of the interaction between displacement, crisis, and subsidies. And here I just want to touch on from our research some of the ways that we found that displacement and crisis can really shape decision-making around every stage of a subsidy program design. So first, whenever it comes to stakeholder coordination, the existence of parallel systems serving displaced people means that additional partners need to be included in program design and implementation. So data for working with displaced people might rest with humanitarian partners instead of national government partners, and there might be additional data, or there might be additional data security considerations around accessing that. It's also important to understand how humanitarian organizations are operating in a different in a specific context when you're trying to take a market-based approach. If humanitarian organizations or actors are engaged in free distribution of energy products, for example, that is important to consider when we're trying to implement a subsidy program, because of course it could undermine it. So there needs to be coordination there. Whenever it comes to product selection and demand side subsidy level setting, as I mentioned, because of the importance of maintaining equality and minimizing tensions between host and displaced communities, it's important to do this in a way that is fair if there are significant differences in income levels and different subsidy tiers are required. It's important to do this in a way that's equitable and communicate with communities around this. Next slide, please. And while demand-side incentives or demand-side subsidies are, of course, important for bridging affordability gaps, supply-side incentives are also really crucial in these contexts, we found, and sort of the tool that's needed to bring companies and help them set up operations in these more complex contexts. And this can be not only a financial incentive, but advanced payments sort of emerged in several of the programs that we looked at as a key de-risking tool in crisis contexts. So in a crisis context and displacement context, so in a crisis context, advance payments are there to provide working capital where other sources might no longer be available. And then in displacement contexts, helping cover up the costs of setting up operations in camps and in remote settings. Also important to note that subsidies and program supports need to be sufficient and last long enough that companies feel that if they take advantage of these programs, they can set up sustainable operations in displacement settings, and that they won't be in this situation where they've heavily invested in setting up operations in a new context and then are no longer able to continue operating due, for example, to ongoing affordability issues once a subsidy program is no longer available to benefit from. In terms of technical assistance and enabling environment support, humanitarian partners that are working closely with these communities and also local organizations have an important role to play in helping with ensuring that awareness raising support and marketing is culturally appropriate and in people's native language, helping navigate working with different humanitarian partners to gain access to displaced communities. It might also be necessary to provide more logistical support to reach remote locations or contexts affected by a disaster, for example. When it comes to verification, Patrick, are you coming on to shut me down? Okay, give me like 30 seconds to wrap up. In verification for RBF programs, it's important to consider flexible methods in crisis contexts and to account for the potential mobility of displaced people. And then lastly, whenever it comes to scaling an exit strategy realistically, because these are complex contexts, it will probably take more time for the market ecosystem to develop. And so it might be more appropriate to, instead of focusing on phase out, finding ways to extend a program, taper off slowly over time, launch a new program to continue providing companies who've already set up in these contexts with support, or ideally include them in national subsidy programs and design national subsidy programs in a way that allows companies serving these contexts to participate. So yes, I am done, and now I will hand over, now that I've given you a high-level overview of the intersection of displacement and subsidy program design, we'll hear from our first case study example who can sort of provide some more concrete details on how this works in practice. So I'd like to introduce Ben Butele. He's the program manager for energy access in refugee hosting districts in Uganda under the results-based financing component of the Electricity Access Scale-Up Project, which is the national energy program funded by the World Bank in Uganda, which is inclusive of refugees in line with Uganda's inclusive policy agenda. So yes, I am done. Thank you all for listening. And Ben, please take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. Yeah, as just Kathy has introduced, this is a national program funded by the World Bank and also co-funded by the government of Uganda. It's called the Electricity Access Scale Up. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in our context today, we will be looking at about, that's fine. Then, oh, please one step back. Yes, please. Okay, in the origin of this program, as I mentioned, that this is funded by the World Bank, commencement was 2022, and it will last up to 2027 June. That's a 5-year program, and it's a nationwide renewable energy access program, which helps to facilitate access for households, enterprises, and public institutions. And the targets for this are in 2 strands. The 1,000 on-grid connections by the Ministry of Energy, and then the 504,000 off-grid connections under the UECCC. On the off-grid solutions, we are having financial intermediation as our main instrument of providing electricity access, and this is to the tune of 135 million USD directly for the off-grid solutions, clean cooking, and productive use. Please move on to the next slide. Yes. Aware that Uganda is the largest refugee hosting country in Africa with a total population of refugees nearly 2 million. And as of now, about 48% of this population live under $1 a day. And therefore, this is, of course, a major challenge to energy access. And 95% of the refugees themselves are in rural settlements. Just quite a small handful are in the urban settings. And that means they depend entirely on wood biomass as their main source of fuel as of now. The electricity access scale-up has 4 components. And the component we deal with currently now is the component 3, which promotes integration of refugees and host communities into the national plans and programs, and also supports Uganda's progressive refugee response in terms of all the policy frameworks to ensure that vulnerable communities are considered in equal access of social services as well as energy services. Of course, this fits into the National Development Plan 3 and 4, as well as also in the GCR. Let's move on. Yes, in our design, we implement the electricity access under the UECCC through instruments. There are 6 instruments that provide for financing mechanisms. The first is, of course, the direct user financing for households and enterprises that would like to acquire large-scale, maybe renewable energy, either in a situation where they would like to have their own plans. For instance, let's say a farming institution doing a milk coolers, which cannot be got through the financing loan. This is the first line where you can provide direct access to loans. The second is the credit facility as a working capital for the energy companies. This is through the participating financial institutions that will need either capex or liquidity to be able to import products and be able to put them on the market. The third instrument is, of course, the RBF through grants, which are in place to remove the affordability gap and also provide market entry and clear out the barriers. Then the next is the personal credit guarantee. This is provided as a guarantee to the participating financial institutions in order to mitigate risks associated with, of course, an onward lending. And as a result of probably maybe when an ESCO probably runs bankrupt and is unable to pay for that loan, there is a provision within this implementation framework to offset those risks. The other is the technology risk guarantee, which mitigates risks associated with innovation technologies, either through the PFIs or directly through the ESCOs. And the last, of course, is direct support to the ESCOs to start up new markets in the event where, for instance, their banks are not part of the participating banks. So our design of implementation, please go ahead, as you have done. Yes, our approach into the implementation of RBF subsidy is in such a way that we do invite the companies through expression of interests to apply for this, to apply for participation for the grant agreements. And once the ESCOs apply, the technical review committee then reviews the applications, and inclusive of the product list that we are providing for. This technical review consists of the National Bureau of Standards, the Ministry of Energy, and then the UECCC team, where, for instance, then once a product is listed, the UNBS is responsible for assessing that these products are certified on the market and they have maybe warrants so that before then they are listed onto the product list for the market. Once that is done, then UCCC will then sign a grant agreement with the participating ESCO. And once that grant agreement is signed, then this provides for us then to provide a formal introduction to this ESCO, inclusive of also introduction to the RHDs, where they're able to participate. Next slide. Yes, please. So the ESCO is required by the grant agreement to provide quarterly reports once they start selling eligible products, and also upload instantly the sales from the point of sale, so that this is transparently viewed. And then the independent verifier then accesses the platform, the prospect platform, and is able to aggregate all the sales under each energy company. And once that is then done, the report is provided to the electricity access scale-up team, who then verifies this and submits to the World Bank for no objection. It's then from that point that once the bank acknowledges that this has been cleared, then we are able to pay the ESCO their grant agreement. And this is a process that is envisaged to take up to maximum of 45 days, sometimes much less, sometimes up to close to that date. And this is, of course, one of the bottlenecks that ESCOs have expressed over time. So we can go to the next slide. So just a quick look at our levels of subsidies that are provided under this. On the off-grid energy technologies, we have two products. We have the solar lanterns that has a subsidy cap of 100,000 with a subsidy of 60%. And then you have the solar home systems ranging from 1,000 luminous with 3 bulbs up to 5 bulbs, inclusive of phone charging and accessibility. So this has a subsidy cap of 274. These are all in Uganda shillings, and then a subsidy of 50%. Suffice to say that also we provide incentives to the ESCOs based on where they're operating for the access to RHDs, refugee settlements and refugee hosting districts. There is an additional incentive per unit sold, and this is provided for as a supply incentive. Visit to the next one. On the subsidy provision for productive users of energy, the percentage is as very high as 60% for all of them. And the product list currently that have been trading are about 6. That includes solar-powered water pumps, you have solar-powered refrigerators, you have solar-powered grain milling, you have solar-powered heaters, you have on-grid refrigerators, as well as on-grid graining mills. And as you have seen on the other side, the subsidy cap ranges from as low as 3 million to up to max of 5 million. But the percentage of subsidy is the same. And also we provide for incentives per unit sold in the RHDs as well as in the far-to-reach locations. This is to support the ESCOs to be able to meet the challenges and the risks that come along with those last mile sales. Next slide, please. And then the last category are the clean cooking technologies. We have the non-biomass stoves, which have also a varying range of subsidies. For the non-biomass, you have the household biogas, you have the liquefied petroleum gas, you have ethanol cooking, you have induction, and then you have the pressure cookers as well as the solar cooking with the PV battery systems. The range here is between as low as 30% to 50% max. And also the highest subsidy cap under this is 870,000. We also provide for incentives along the different channels based on the distances away from the capital. The next is the next slide, please. Okay. So here then we are looking at the progress so far made. Under the trends of sales, we have noticed that much of the peak sales have been happening around the period of March to April, and this is mainly associated to, of course, if you realize the rural populations, their harvest periods and sales, the market events has come around this period, and therefore that's when they have money in the pockets to be able to buy that. The graph tends to fall a little bit in the period of June, downwards up to almost September, and you will see again that also coming to December, the graph starts going up again, and that's the trend that we have predicted, and that's how it has been for the period of the last 1 year. This program started in 24 November. That was when we launched the RBF, and now this is nearly 1 year plus where we are currently.
Ben, 3 more minutes.
Yes, please. Only that the slides are not moving the speed I want, but that's fine. I can stop somewhere and then we'll see. So this is a country distribution map of how the sales are performing. You can move to the next slide. And the RHDs are mainly the northern and western, and there the sales, as you have seen, are a bit little low. When you come to the desegregation of the sales in terms of the different schemes, off-grid is the highest so far that we have surpassed the target. And then this is followed by clean cooking. And the most common products that have gone under the clean cooking are the LPGs, whereas under the off-grid is of course the solar home systems. Productive use of energy is still a little bit low, but the highest sales is recorded under the solar-powered water pumps for agricultural units. Please move to the next one. Move to the next one. This is just a flash on the other one. So if you look at the overall matrix of the results framework, we will see that under the OGS, that is the off-grid, we have surpassed. Our target is 142,000 units. We are already on 365,000 units. Under the clean cooking, our target is 352,000 units. We are on 158,000 units. That's about 50%. Close to productive users of energy, our target is 9,000 units. We are on 2,000, they're about 2,100 units. That's extremely low, and there are very many reasons associated with that. We can move to the next slide. In terms of the grant disbursements, we have so far disbursed 96 billion, that's equivalent to 26 million, around 26 million USD in grants to pay off the subsidies, and about 1,500 USD in terms of incentives for the far last mile destinations. A total of 64 ESCOs have claimed this finances so far. Please go to the next slide.
Thank you.
I want to touch on the RHD briefly. Now, on the sales in the RHD, as you will see, our target is 27,000, and we are surpassed that slightly on 27,200. That's about 101%. Specifically to the refugees, we are on 58% because the target is 13,500. While in clean cooking, our target is 53,000. In the refugee settlement, in the RHDs and refugee settings, we are on only 14% in terms of achievement in that. Specifically to the refugees, under the clean cooking, only 280 units. This is mainly because, as I said, we have been dealing mostly in the higher tier 1 and tier 2 technologies. We have just started in the mid-term with the biomass technologies, and we hope to bridge that gap in the next 1 year coming. Let's please, the next slide. You can alert me once it is time up. In terms of this segregation in gender terms, specifically in the refugee settlements, the sales, 52% of the sales have gone to women-headed households. And in the host communities, about 40% to the women-headed households. Overall, we have 43% sales to the women households. This is a good mix in terms of our targeting and the percentages that we require. To the next slide.
I think, Ben, thank you very much.
Yeah.
We will be staying with
thank you,
Uganda.
Yeah.
So I think yes.
That's fine then, that's fine. We can stop there.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. And we're not going to be moving away from Uganda, but as we transition, what I do want to point out, tying Katie's presentation to what Ben has just presented, was the need to essentially integrate the refugee or the displaced communities into the national. And you can see that very clearly that in Uganda, that's the approach, with some additional incentives to reach the displaced communities. But we are going to be staying in Uganda, and I'm pleased to invite Samuel, who is with GIZ in Uganda, to come and present to us about the work that they've been doing in Uganda, also which preceded the work with the Energy Scaler project, and also to touch on how the two programs also talk and cooperate or coordinate with each other. So 15 minutes to you, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Good afternoon, colleagues. Good evening. For those who may not be within the time zone with us, good morning. Yeah, my name is Samuel. I work with GIZ. I'm going to take you through our demand-side subsidy, a project that Patrick has rightly said it was a precursor for answering in the UECCC project that Ben has just said. Next slide. Next slide. Yes, the origin of our project clearly stems from the fact that we have seen inequalities in energy access between different categories of people, the refugees, the host communities, and also those who actually still live within rural communities with low income levels. And the fact that despite the supply side and also enabling measures that are trying to address market challenges, especially building these markets. However, the issue of affordability is still existing in some of these rural communities where refugees and host communities are living. Yeah, as Ben rightly put up that to date, Uganda hosts more than 1.9 refugees, and many of them live in these rural areas, what we call refugee settlements, together with the host communities. We still see lack of availability and also the issue of affordability of technologies that we perceive to be improved. And therefore, to address this, we felt there should be a complementary approach through which subsidies could be directly given to such groups of communities who are still lacking behind. And the fact that in some of these communities, free handouts are given, we felt subsidies can still be given in a way that the prices of these products are not completely removed. And that's why NDEV launched the demand-side subsidy right from 2022 with its design. And the reason is simply we wanted to catalyze markets in these areas that are perceived to be risky for private sector to venture in. Next slide. I want to give you just an overview of this project. Like I said, the demand-side subsidy is not only implemented in Uganda, it's also implemented in other countries like Malawi, Niger, Liberia, but the design aspect follows the same principle that I'll show you in the next slide. For our country here, like we said, this subsidy is dispersed via RBF mechanism, and we look at technologies of tier 1 off-grid, that's off-grid solar. We also look at the cooking, the ICS, the improved cook stoves. We're also looking at the higher tier cooking, right from tier 3, tier 4. Primarily, the modern ICS. We're also promoting the electric pressure cookers, as well as this project was launched in 2022 with its design, but the implementation kicked off last year, 2024, April and March. As you can see, some of the photos, these photos signify the launch, public launch, with the State Minister for Energy launching it at central level. Our target here is, for this project, we are looking at new additions, households that are going to receive off-grid solar for the first time, or maybe those that are climbing along the ladder. So we were specific in terms of what we want to achieve. The target group for us here was the refugee and host communities. And the subsidy is hosted by the fund manager, the private sector foundation that actually does onboarding of the companies that I'll show you in the implementation structure. But of course, under the global coordination is done by JZ and RRDO, but of course implemented by JZ through the private sector foundation Uganda. With the funding came from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Next slide. Next slide. Yes. I wanted to share our experience with the design of this project. Of course, the project follows some principles. One is we wanted to benefit from the long-term experience of NDEV, especially in Uganda here in promoting market-based energy access in refugees. And two, we also wanted to minimize the market distortions, and the approach we wanted to use the design was the market-based instead of giving free handouts. But of course, the group of people, the ones who benefit from it, there should be a rigorous verification and also monitoring. The verification is rigorous in a way that should be quickly done so that the private sector companies participating should not have their capital tied up. And of course, we also prioritize the leave no one behind principle in amplifying the impacts. Like we said, we are looking at households that have never gotten some of these off-grid products. We also emphasized the issue of strategic partnership. Like Ben said, there are partners in our country that were also already doing subsidy kind of schemes. So therefore, there was need to for strategic kind of harmonization at that level. And of course, the exit strategy, how are we going to leverage in terms of when the project ends? We're looking at some of the subsidy, the bigger subsidy like the UCCC is implementing, how our pilot could fed into that after the project timeline. So these are some of the basic principles that we looked at when we are designing. Next slide. Yes, I want to give you some of the key aspects that actually we considered, and I feel they are really critical when you are designing this because they are context-based. They may not apply in every situation. Like I said, our target group was refugees and host communities, and these categories of people are located in specific areas. But of course, we had a clear objective. Our objective was to catalyze markets for improved cook stores and off-grid products in these rural markets where refugees and hosts live. But because we really wanted the right kind of people to benefit from this support, therefore our targeting took the approach of geographic and demographic, meaning that these refugees are located in specific areas, and also within those refugee host districts, there are clear indicators that they are located in this, so to avoid the subsidy going to wrong households. Therefore, we needed to be geographic, and within the demographics that the refugees and hosts, but also within these categories of people, there are people who already had them, they are already connected, or they had access to. Therefore, we intended other parameters to to remove them so that the right people benefit from this. Yeah, I think one aspect that was very critical for us was the subsidy level determination. And based on our experience in these refugee settlements and also sharing data with different categories of stakeholders that were already in this market, we were able to get enough data that helped us to know the willingness to pay and also affordability gap that existed within this, so that the subsidy levels are matched to the gap that we wanted to address. But again, also there are categories of people like the stakeholders like Mexico. Mexico had done pilots in BDBD through the Antere project. We were able to extend with them the UNHCR World Food Program. They were able to give us enough data to know some of the energy needs or the energy expenditures. We're also able to do our own assessment, especially we conducted a survey to understand the willingness to pay in some of the 3 settlements that we are now implementing in. Subsidy level calculations, we looked at the average subsidy level design to match that affordability gap based on the ability to pay and also willingness to pay. But most importantly, how would these subsidy levels be delivered? Like we said, we use the RBF approach managed by the fund manager, where the subsidies are transferred directly to the end user by these companies that I will show you in the next slide. Yeah, but most importantly, we would only do that after these sales are verified and having known that they went to the right category or the eligible households. Yeah, and how would we be able to track the progress of this? Yeah, we looked at an online platform that will be able to help us to visualize where these sales are going, and also try to somehow determine the eligibility at the point of sale. So COBO is used, as you will see in the next slide. But most importantly, like Kathy said, the collaboration or the engagement with the different stakeholders also proved very okay for us to understand the context and also how would the local leadership perceive this, so that there's buy-in and also maybe the OPM to provide access to this, the permits, all that. So that engagement was very critical for us. And we also looked at some of the mitigation measures. For example, would this subsidy go to the right households that we are targeting, or would it go to non-markets that we are looking at? So those mitigation measures, we looked at them and addressed them. The communication was very critical because the subsidy levels must be communicated so that there's no discontent between the different categories of people. So basically, that was the design aspect that we considered. Next slide. Yes, like I said, we did geographical and demographic targeting, and we are currently implementing this project within 18 rural refugee host districts. Some of these districts, around 10 of them, are hosting refugee settlements, but there are also other additional districts that have the same parameters from the national census. They fall within the same, what I may call low income levels. What our national housing and plan statistics have shown, and also the multi-tier poverty index has also put some of these districts, and they are closely near each other, as you might see in this coloration. And these grids are some of them that are not being targeted here. Of recent, we also extended to Southwest, and the 2 of the refugee settlements, Chaka 2 and the Rwamanza in Kamwenge, are part of this, as you can see here. But our target, technology-wise, we were looking at 25,900. This is a revised target that we did along the way of implementation. So we had to also do adjustments within our design. We have also revised our lower tier, the tier 1 cook stoves, from our original target to now realistic one based on the realities on the ground to 30,000, about 30,000, and then the higher tier, which we actually wanted to pilot to see if it is accepted. Like I said, the technology selection was based on the needs. This is market-based, so we were not forcing it on the categories that we are targeting. It's the demand, and we're also looking at whether it can be, these technologies can be scaled, and the context in which they are sold were key parameters. Next slide. Yes, the subsidy levels here that we're implementing
3
right
minutes,
now.
Samuel.
Okay, I'm just summarizing. So all in all, we had maximum subsidy level of 400 for the tier 1, and then as you can see on the screen. But most importantly here is how these companies were onboarded. It was a very competitive one because we didn't want to, wanted companies that merit to go in these areas. And overall, we contracted 8 solar companies and then 10 modern ICS, 2 for modern and then ethanol. Next slide. But like I said, the subsidy affordability gap was based on ability to pay and also willingness to pay. So how did we ensure that the subsidy reached equal categories of people, the refugees and hosts? We had to introduce another parameter in contracting process by PSFU. At least for solar systems, we had to do 50-50 ratio. It is embedded in the project. As you can see, results here. Clearly, refugees were able to be reached more than the hosts for solar, but it's reverse for cooking. Maybe we can talk about that at a later time. Yeah, but generally, we see our solar companies were doing well to reach refugees, but cooking were struggling. Next. Yes, most importantly, how were we able to monitor and verify these cells? We are using Kobo tool for monitoring, and this Kobo tool helps us to check the eligibility at the point of sale. Like we said, we wanted the right households to get this, so this tool has been helping us. And the companies are also able to use this tool to track their performance. But of late, we removed it for ICS companies because it also had some issues with them. Many of them didn't have smartphones, and it was quite expensive for them to buy smartphones for their sales agents, and also their sales were not really frequent. So we had to remove it. But most importantly, identification IDs and the for refugees and the host communities is one of the parameters that we use here. So for us to ensure that these subsidies are dispersed, we contracted 2 IVs, one IVA for solar and then for cooking. It's a mitigation. If one never performed well, we wouldn't really lose all, but we have seen solar is doing well, except the cooking. Now, these are the cells as you have seen. We have about 21 stoves verified, 23,000 solar products verified. The eligibility generally is very high because Kobo has helped us to scrutinize the customers at the point of sale. Lastly, next slide, as I summarize. Yes, like I said, stakeholder engagement has been critical. At the point of design, we involved this number of, as you can see on your screen. But maybe one thing I wanted also to share here is we were able to harmonize our subsidy level with UECCC, Ben's team, so that since 6 of our companies are also participating in UECCC, there was need to harmonize the subsidy levels. And I think the coordination has been great with the different categories of stakeholders I've listed here. Lastly, next. Yes, someone has already asked about the planned exit. Like I said, our demand side subsidy was designed to feed into UECCC's project. And since we started a little bit earlier, like I said, 6 of our companies, solar companies, are already in there. So it was easy for them to transit to UECCC. But along that, we also support these companies to build structures that we feel they will continue to do their sales after the project has ended. Yeah, what has worked very well? What has worked? Oh, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. I've finished.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to cut you short, but we don't want to run out of time for our last presentation. And we will have an opportunity for Q&A, so please do hang around for that. We are not going to ignore your questions, but we want to switch countries now and look at Mozambique. I think we are all aware Mozambique is a country where we see displacement from different things. Some of it is around climate change, some of it is around also conflict or insecurity. And we want to hear about some of the work that's there. And I'm inviting Johanna Hartmann, who's also with the GIZ program, to talk about what they've been doing in Mozambique. Johanna?
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the speakers from Uganda, my colleagues that already shared their experience in Uganda. Let me tell you a little bit about what our experience in Mozambique was so far, which I can only reiterate, and I'm trying not to repeat what the colleagues from Uganda already said, but just mention it. And as Patrick rightly pointed out, so there are over 700 internally displaced people in Mozambique currently in several locations. In the past 5 years, there were 7 major disasters due to climate shocks alone. So that led to many people moving around within the country. And since 2017, especially the northern part of Mozambique is facing humanitarian crisis, and many people are displaced, and the conflict is going on and off. This year had been some acceleration again. Thank you. So end of Mozambique. Like in Uganda, we take a holistic and multifaceted approach and trying to identify what works to reach the most vulnerable people. And within that group, we clearly see the IDPs as one of the most difficult to reach. But we see that this is very, very important, that those that do have to leave their home and identify in a new situation, a way to make a living, access to energy is something that's really, really important. And I just wanted to bring also a face of somebody in a resettlement area. In general, the Mozambicans are, or the whole population do not differ that much in the rural areas from those that had to flee someplace or not. That's why I'm bringing here the overall results until last year. The majority of these people have been reached in the past 5 to 6 years with either small solar home systems, rather not lanterns, but small systems, and improved cooking solutions, majority in urban areas. As Samuel already pointed out, in rural areas and displaced people usually live in rather rural settings. People cook with firewood, and then they don't have the feeling that they spent money actually on the firewood. So there's no opportunity cost if you can save then this time. And the time saved, it does not always necessarily lead to an increased household income. And in the rural areas, families really live on less than $1. IOM surveyed the population in the resettlement areas that they are looking at, and at least half of them live way below $1 a day. And then they have to spend some of this money for batteries, for kerosene lamps, so that they can have that they have lighting in the houses or the settlement tents that they do live in. Next slide. How we do this in Mozambique is that we have a twofold approach. We have support the private sector. On the one hand, with technical support, what we have been doing since 2009, in training the startups, supporting those companies that have been in the sector for quite some while to how to expand from the more urban areas and urban settings into more rural settings, and building capacity within those companies. And in the first place, similar to what Sam had explained, a results-based financing scheme is implemented by our partner FDC, which is the biggest local NGO here in Mozambique. They run the FASER Fund, and the FASER Fund has been implemented already over 17 million euros. And we just yesterday launched a new window with additional 2.5 million euros. And with this, we have already been supporting quite a number of Mozambicans, and we have some aspects that I wanted to point out, especially for IDPs. So in 2000, you can go to the next slide, please. In 2019, there was a huge cyclone that was devastating, especially two provinces in Mozambique, Sofala and Manica. So the FASER Fund opened up a window especially for these two provinces. And that resulted in a very specific incentive, so that companies that can apply for the RBF funding usually are free to work wherever they want, but we wanted to incentivize them not with the demand side subsidy like they did in Uganda, but with an incentive that we would pay out for those clients that would be in those humanitarian areas. So apart from a basic incentive that is a prefixed sum agreed in the contract that the company signs with FDC beforehand, companies could get additional key results incentive if the client would live, for example, lives very far away from the main road and from the provincial capitals, or in the case of the humanitarian incentive, if the location is built in is listed either by IOM or UNHCR as one of the resettlement areas, including the host communities. And for the resettlement areas, we also had a similar approach where we even increased the percentage for those clients that the companies would be able to sell either a solar home system, as you can see here on the slide, or an improved cook stove. From this learnings, we are always trying to adapt within the FASER to make it more flexible and to listen to what the companies are telling us. And these incentives have been set as a percentage of the costs, of the price that the companies are buying the systems and the stoves for. And from a verification point of view, we learned that the farther you go out and the more difficult it is to reach for these people to be reached by the companies to sell the products. The same goes for the verification part. So usually they don't have access to a phone. So phone verification, which would be usually what we're usually doing, is sometimes tricky because people are not at home, they are not reachable. And field verification, of course, is a lot more costly than if you do a verification field visit in urban settings where you can easily reach many clients at the same time. Next slide. For the humanitarian window, we reached over 300,000 people with solar home systems and over 85,000 people with improved cook stoves, and 2/3 about that only in those specific provinces of Sofala and Manica. And at least 1,300 people were considered IDPs, where we did do a verification and paid out additional incentives. But from the lower number, we recognized maybe our incentive level as we have put them are not enough, so that companies that have still a lot to do in let's say more easier low-hanging fruit areas to reach people that are also not having access to either lighting or improved cooking. And so setting the right incentive, what is quite difficult. So in the call that we launched yesterday, FASER is now asking the companies to let us know what would be a fair incentive to go into areas where they haven't been in the past, especially also for IDPs. If they can then look out for very vulnerable groups so that we identify the costs to really reach these people and leave no one behind is not only a mere saying, but that we are really looking into that and making sure that all Mozambicans will have access to energy in a reliable way. We are very eager to hear from these companies, which some of them already have nice approaches and ideas how they can offer that to us. So happy to report then back to all of you when we have the results, and if we see that the costs need to be addressed accordingly in very vulnerable settings, as all the speakers before me pointed out.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I didn't have to cut you off. So thank you so much. I think we've heard from 4 interesting speakers. We had Katie give the broad context around energy access in displaced settings and some of the things that have been explored. We've heard from UCCC and Sam with GIZ in Uganda and Johanna. So I want to pivot and give a chance to some of your questions that have come. And I'll pose this to all of you. I think there's a question around determining the pricing or the subsidy levels. And I think there's 2 elements. One is really trying to get what is that figure and how you've been able to determine that. And there was a second question around the sustainability, particularly after the program ends and either the prices have to readjust or all. I think Sam partially answered that question, but let me give both those questions to all of you to start, and I'll kindly ask you to give your responses as briefly as possible.
Let me take it up.
Ben, go ahead.
Okay. On the question of the calculation of the subsidies, of course, in Uganda, we are relying mostly on the Uganda Bureau of Standards assessment reports on poverty indexes, and as well as also results arising from market surveys of these products and how consumers have been struggling with it. This provides for a range, because we're doing a national subsidy, and therefore the national surveys figures are very important in this determination, and that's what was used. On the question of the sustainability plan and what next after the period of the implementation, how to approach the years after that. But first and foremost, we are looking at the catalyzation of the within
Ben, I think we're losing you unless it's on my side. Okay, so maybe I can ask the same question, particularly around sustainability. Johanna, you're now into a renewal of your program, right? And I think can you maybe talk a little bit about how you've looked at sustainability, both on the pricing and after the program?
Thank you, Patrick. Of course, I can elaborate a little bit more. What I already touched upon is that we have a quite elaborate scheme developed with a base incentive that's calculated on the CIF price that's then offered by the company. How much do they pay to import the products into Mozambique? And usually, depending a little bit on the technology, but it's always less than 50% of the CIF price. It's also what the company tells us what they need. And then we have additional incentives for different target groups. So they can, if they are selling to a family in the very rural area, we have different levels that are then verified against a list of localities within Mozambique, measuring the distance from the point of sales towards, let's say, the main roads, so that that we assume those locations that are very far away also deserve a higher percentage of incentive, because the costs arise quite disproportionately for the companies to reach these people. And the same goes for settlement areas, where I wanted to say a market-based approach is quite difficult to implement. That's due to the fact that in many of these areas, they are used that NGOs are coming and giving them stuff for free. So handing out free samples is maybe not the best idea. But on the other hand, these people do have maybe limited funds, but they do spend it on other means. And then the percentage of what they spend on their energy needs is higher than what they would actually spend if they would be able to get a pay-go financed solar home system, for example. But then there are other, let's say, prerequisitions that need to be in place. So a phone is essential. And with a phone, you need be able to charge it. So there's then the the hen and egg problem. What comes first, and the risk for those clients is definitely higher. So now with the new window, we are hoping that when the companies offer us a little bit more insights into the costs that are really related apart from the technology, because we acknowledge that that's not the only cost to reach people, then we can set the incentives in a smart way so that we're not destroying the market, that they can maximize the outreach to the IDPs and the host communities. One other point is that, of course, with these pilots, let's say, depending on how much fund is available, then the companies can also plan bigger projects or smaller projects. So if you only want to reach 10 people, then of course the cost per person is very high compared to large scale sales in one area.
Okay. If I may, I want to pivot a little bit the question to, and it'll be, I think maybe let's start off with Sam and Ben, and I'll also come to you, Johanna. I think the research work has really mapped, was it about 33 different subsidy programs across some of the markets. And in Uganda, you talk about 9 subsidy programs really running, sometimes concurrently in parallel. How are we coordinating, or how have you coordinated your programs to be able to work at the same time without, and how are you making that work?
Yeah, just like Samuel mentioned, there is an existing conversation and ongoing discussions between NDEV and also UECCC, the ESC project, but also bilateral, we have conversations with the Mexico that are doing some similar projects. These are aimed at focusing mainly on the refugee hosting areas, because the national programs tend to be more secular than the refugee. But however, when our program was designed originally, we did not look at providing a tailored subsidy for refugees because of the conflict it will arise. Because if you have a host population living in the same vicinity, our people live in settlements, not in camps. So, and therefore they're accessing the same market, they're accessing the same public institutions. And if you create a gap in the subsidy provision for the host population as well as for the refugees, this is likely to trigger a conflict. So that was something that we considered. However, in terms of what are the caps, this was not unilaterally agreed between the different entities, but somewhere in the midterm, we are in conversation about that to try and see. With NDEV, we have kind of aligned the subsidies for the RHDs, for the refugee hosting districts. But also, this is a very good thing to going forward when the additional implementing partners of RBF, they should be able also to align with what is existing and what are the benchmarks that they can use. Something that I left out while I was cut off was about the sustainability. We are looking at, for instance, the future has the carbon market. Whereas maybe the direct funding for the subsidies might not be forever there, but there's the carbon footprints that can be used as a form of subsidy for be able to provide price reductions for the end users. Yes. Over to you.
Maybe I can just add something. Ben has rightly put it. At institutional level, I think there has been a lot of engagements, and
Samuel, just come closer to your laptop, please. You're a bit far. We can hear you, but it's a bit low. Mm-hmm.
Yes, at country level, our Ministry of Energy is trying to coordinate all the different subsidies so that there's this one. But Ben has rightly put, NDEV and the UCCC had to harmonize some of the subsidies, especially at refugee, because these are the same categories of people we are considering. Having different subsidy levels certainly would cause tension among the different groups. But I think in energy sector, different organizations were having bilateral talks, but just like Ben said, we need a bigger platform to really come together and harmonize all this for the good of the sector. Thank you.
Ghana, I'll ask the same question, but I'll also ask in the context, because you partner quite a lot with the IOM, right? In Mozambique. Could you also contextualize now with also how you coordinate there?
Sure. But maybe I first talk about the coordination among the RBF funds that there are currently 4 running in Mozambique, so different programs where we certainly coordinate, but also wanted to state that the need is still large. So there's then it's maybe a little bit more competition between the approaches that the RBF funds take. But from the experience, the companies sign with all the RBF funds that are available, and we do cross verification. So we check each other's results so that we are making sure that each client is only supported by one program. In Mozambique, we're very lucky that the World Bank is coming in with a larger RBF that started last year. So we are hoping that with FASER, we can then look into the really vulnerable groups. That's why we're launching now this more targeted window. With IOM, we don't work on a results-based financing, but we have a cooperation, and they look into the possibility to establish a mesh grid in 1 or 2 of their areas. And we partnered with them because we really like to find out how expensive that is and how that could work, how the payment structure could be, and to also extend their approach to the host communities, because we reckon what Ben just mentioned, that this could then increase the conflict in those areas, but we would rather then try to include all of the people that live in that area and close to these mesh grids. The colleagues have done a feasibility study, and next week on the 17th, they're presenting in a webinar the results, where they have looked into what technology could work and how. And in the coming year, they're going to implement it. And then if you follow us, you can also hear about what the results were there. Happy to share in the chat here the link for all people that are interested in listening in and asking questions to the colleagues of who went through with the feasibility study and the cost estimations for that.
So I think we're coming to the tail end, and I know Katie had some announcements that I want to give her a chance to make as we conclude. But before I do that, I just want to ask each of you, what would the one thing you would say, based on your experiences, that would really help drive not leaving displaced communities behind? One thing. If you don't have anything, it's fine.
Can I also start? In my view, of course, the displaced communities need livelihoods in order to be able to access energy. So it must be a protracted approach where, for instance, they have access to productive use of energy in order to be able to acquire other energy technologies. Yeah.
Great input. Thank you, Samuel. Anything from your side?
Yes, I think for me, one thing is I think subsidies are still good, make a channel to reach those needy people that we call poor. However, it must be targeted approach so that the subsidies do not go to unintended categories. Thank you.
Thank you. Johanna?
I just wanted to stress the factor that money is not the only thing that we need. We do need more money, and I'm happy about every dollar, every euro that is channeled through this, but it always needs to be accompanied with TA for the companies, for the sector, but also for the people buying appliances and making sure they understand their saving potential.
Thank you. Katie?
I think that I will come in and just say I think it's important when we are designing subsidies and subsidy programs for companies to participate in. It's important to look at the companies that are most interested in or already operating near displacement settings, and make sure that we're designing programs, especially like bigger, more general national programs, in a way that allows these companies to participate. So if they're smaller and local, if they're refugee-led, maybe an effective program will include support to help them get formally registered as a business that they can participate, or maybe the program needs to provide upfront payments because smaller companies have more trouble accessing working capital. So sort of taking this different approach of looking at how do we help the companies that want to be here, who see it as core to their business strategy and are most committed, oftentimes because they're serving their own communities. How do we help them set up sustainable operations? So that's my 2 cents. And the only announcement that I wanted to make, we do have a slide, but I don't think it's necessary to display if it's a trouble. But just stay tuned because we will be launching in the next couple weeks. It's in design now. The report that kind of summarizes the learnings from this research process that we've undertaken as the GPA and the End User Subsidy Lab. So you'll have in-depth case studies in the report of the 3 programs that we had excellent presentations on today, plus additional programs from our partners in Rwanda. Practical Action is implementing the results-based financing for refugees project, and Mercy Corps has undertaken a very interesting productive use of energy pilot for IDP-led businesses in Somalia as part of their broader Enter Energy program. Building off of energy access supplied by a mini grid expansion in Baidoa and Barawa settlements. And then in the report, in addition to the in-depth case studies, we also have sort of a summary of the key learnings that we have started to develop around what are the best practices for designing subsidies that help develop the market in displacement settings and in emergency contexts. So yeah, I think that's everything for me. Johanna, if you wanna say anything else, you kind of already mentioned, but the webinar next week as well, showcasing NDEV and IOM's work in Mozambique. I'm very much looking forward to joining, and I hope that others here will join as well and sort of keep this discussion going and keep the learning going. So yeah, thanks to everyone who joined from my side. And Patrick, if you want to say anything else to wrap up.
Thank you very much. I think as we wrap up, I want to maybe point out a few things that stood out to me. One is, as we've had this discussion, we've not heard the conversation in a context about aid or giveaways. It's really been around leveraging the private sector, but also providing services to displaced people in a way that is also sustainable. You can hear the word subsidies, but which means there's also an element that there's what they can afford or their ability to contribute in some way. Further, I think did pick up that it's not easy. I think when you listening to Johanna, a reminder that some of the communities that we're looking to serve really are in very difficult places to reach. And the question around how do you provide services in those contexts, getting companies, getting those energy products to those, and some of these interventions and the subsidies are also to make sure that the services are available. And I did pick up, the challenge also about how do you do verification in those contexts, that it's just as hard to verify as well as, it's as hard to verify as it is to actually deliver the services. And I think also you did see in all these presentations that question around sustainability, not just in terms of the level of the subsidy that's provided, but also in the programs itself, whether directly or indirectly. But the very core of the programs do look at sustainability, and it's something that we'll keep working around. Going back to the End User Subsidy Lab, I think, as we've shared, the End User Subsidy Lab is a learning environment that's really looking to pick up some of the things that are being piloted, what are the lessons learned, and are able to take on board to the next programs. You can see in Uganda, the GIZ NDF program did inform the ESP program from the government of Uganda. And also for us, it'll be interesting to see what happens in Mozambique and the questions that are raised from there. I do see one question, one hand raised. We're at the tail end, but I don't know if Nancy, if you can make your question quick. Otherwise, we do want to wrap up, or you can type. I've seen that hand, Nancy. I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself. I don't want to deny you that opportunity. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself, Nancy. Nancy, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this meeting. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Nancy Najula. I'm attending this meeting from Kenya, Kakuma, whereby we are also, I'm from Locado. It's a local NGO here, and we are implementing projects in regards to energy access to the camp. However, I'm here to take notes and to learn from you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope, please do reach out to us if you can also share both the lessons from your experience on the ground, and if we can also give you any information from what our speakers have been able to share. Otherwise, thank you very much to everybody. We will be developing a report from this, and we'll make sure that the presentations are also available for you to access and refer to. Otherwise, thank you very much, and please have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you.
you.
And bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. Thank you, Patrick, for the moderation.